Hi everyone, and welcome to Butchery 101, the channel where we break down and demystify meat and meat-related topics so y'all can have the meat buying and eating experience you deserve. It's a really great summary of the meat industry in America as it stands today, through the lens of a small, multi-generational, family-owned ranch in Montana, the Charters. Anyone who follows me on Instagram knows that I'm all for representation of BIPOC everywhere, especially where they would often be ignored. But I really dig that they featured a multi-generational, family-owned ranch in this context. I think for a lot of Americans, the Charter family is who they imagine as Americana, like down home, salt of the earth, hardworking folks who are like just trying to make a living. That is to say, I think this family are people that most Americans would never accuse of being lazy or entitled or for asking for a handout. Okay, this is definitely code for, hey, even conservatives should be able to look at the Charters and not find reasons for them to be systemically eliminated from their businesses. And yet here we are. And so with that, let's do some highlights and reactions to this New York Times article. Excerpt 1. Since the 1800s, the four largest meat packers have used a wave of mergers to increase their share of the market from 36% to 85%, according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Wow. Wow. Okay, I really want y'all to really let that one sink in because it's a reality that is really hard to accept and kind of conceptualize, but it's terrible. 85% is a huge market share. That means that every single independent meat producer in the entire United States, all put together, make up less than 15% of the nation's meat market. That's called a monopoly, you guys, and there are literally laws against this. Phew. One landmark piece of legislation, the Packers and Stockyards Act of 1921, was adopted by Congress to, quote, safeguard farmers and ranchers, among other market participants, from unjustly discriminatory and monopolistic practices. Okay, I'm gonna link this one in the description below if any of y'all feel like reading all the way through it, but I'll also do another reaction video to it sometime, reaction and or explaining video to it sometime, as the Biden administration also referenced it very recently. Excerpt 4. About the large meat packers. Their goal is to control the market so that they can control the price, said Marian Nessel, a professor of food studies and public health at New York University. The pandemic exposed the consequences of the consolidation of the meat industry. Yes. 12 out of 10 would recommend for a friend, no notes. Nessel, by the way, is the author of a book called Food Politics, among others, and has been a huge advocate for food system justice for decades. You might recognize her from her many spots in interviews in terrifying food system documentaries like Food Inc., etc. So, I just want to contrast this very well-informed, insightful observation with the following. Excerpt 5. JBS, the largest meat packer in the United States, declined to discuss the impact of consolidation on the market, instead referring questions to a Washington lobbying organization, the North American Meat Institute. Quote, concentration has nothing to do with price, said a spokeswoman for the organization, Sarah Little. The cattle and beef markets are dynamic. This is pretty classic avoidance by these big companies. They super don't give a fuck, and that's because so far they don't have to. They peddle cheap meat produced by abused, marginalized communities and reap profits in such a way that there, thus far, has been no room for accountability. Also, NAMI is a lobbyist group, which is literally the profession who convinces lawmakers to legislate on their behalf. When they say like special interests, these are the guys. Anyway, there's no reason to trust what they say, as it's like literally the most biased version of history. Excerpt 6. Quote, the packers are not masterminds, she said. The packing industry was unprofitable for several years, so they closed plants. Sounds like some weaponized incompetence to me. Maybe they're not masterminds, but let's not pretend that they're innocently going about their business. They know perfectly well what the consequences are of their actions, and they're smart people who prioritize their own profit. Whether they care if they're bankrupting producers, that's not really explored in this comment, and honestly won't be. This woman comes from that world as a former exec, and as a consultant now makes her money from that same network, and if she were to tell the truth about any of this stuff, she'd totally lose revenue. So just a bunch of bias in her comments and statements, and so I'm really not one to trust a thing that she says. Fun fact about JBS, the world's largest meat producer: the two brothers who control the entire enterprise, Wesley and Joelsley Batista, possess a fortune estimated by Bloomberg News at $5.8 billion. 4 years ago, they went to prison after pleading guilty to participation in a Brazilian bribery ring that secured loans from government-owned banks. They have since been released, and a $20 billion international acquisition spree put JBS in control of 1/4 of American capacity for slaughtering beef. It is still unfucking believable to me that these super duper corrupt dudes control 1/4 of American capacity for processing beef. And for anyone who wants to support American industry, do not under any circumstances support JBS. If you can afford to buy an alternative, please do so. 2 large branches of this company were hacked last year, which I did a video on for y'all that'll link here or like maybe here. Yeah, and it was super disruptive to American commerce. Excerpt number 8. While ranchers have been tallying losses, JBS has been celebrating gains. Revenues of $18 billion between July and September, which represented an increase of 32% compared with the same quarter in 2020. Okay, any business owners here? Sound off in the comments, please. Business owners, entrepreneurs, whatever. Did any of you report a 32% revenue gain as compared to the year before? And if you did, was it ethical? Did your partners in that business experience the same kind of prosperity? Did you share that profit with everyone in your supply chain? What did your customers get from it? Just a little thought experiment to like conceptualize 32% profits. Excerpt 9. Instead, the packers now overwhelmingly rely on private contracts with feedlots. Those contracts provide the feedlots with certainty that the packers will buy their animals. In exchange, the feedlots must lock into a price structure that tracks those in public accounts where buyers are scarce. According to industry experts, the system allows packers to lock up the overwhelming supply of cattle at prices they impose under terms hidden from public view. Given the market dominance of the 4 largest packers in their regions, feedlots lack alternative places to sell their animals once they reach slaughtering weight. I don't really have a reaction to that. That's just kind of the reality of the situation, and I wanted to highlight that excerpt for y'all because I think we should all be knowing these things. Moving on. Excerpt 10. The pandemic sparked the problem. The highly intricate and interconnected global supply chain is in upheaval. Much of the crisis can be traced to the outbreak of COVID-19, which triggered an economic slowdown, mass layoffs, and a halt to production. Okay, disagree that the pandemic sparked the problem. The problem has been there, and the pandemic exacerbated it. Just like in many sectors, like income equality. Like, why are some folks able to just work from home and others are deemed and recognized as quote unquote essential, but are still not paid commensurate to their value to society? Or universal healthcare, like, hey, look, the folks who can afford the treatment of it get it, but the folks who can't are just left to suffer and die? What sense does this make? Anyway, all that is to say that these problems existed before the pandemic. We can't only focus on the pandemic as the cause of these problems and therefore imagine that the end of the pandemic would be the solution to these problems. Like, these problems existed before and they're going to exist after, if there is an after COVID. But we need to look at our systems more holistically than just blaming everything on the pandemic. Excerpt 13. His break-even point was $1.30 a pound. Without any consulting or any dealing, they just decided that they were going to pay me $1 a pound, he said. This is 1000% the kind of bullshit manipulation that happens in a one-sided argument. I don't know how many of y'all have experienced a professional power imbalance, but let me just tell you that that's what that looks like. And when you're talking about animals that individually weigh, 1,500 to 2,000 pounds and dozens to hundreds of those, 30 cents on the pound is actually like a lot to lose. 14. His daughter took the disaster as the impetus for creativity. She engaged a small local slaughterhouse to process some of their remaining animals. Then she sold the beef directly to consumers across Montana, marketing it on social media. They go on to disclose that this move was too little too late and that they're liquidating the entire herd anyway. But this business model, when implemented proactively and intelligently and strategically, can totally work. Selling directly to consumers is a really great way to sustain a ranching business, but it does require processing infrastructure to turn the animals into meat. This is something that is so exciting about the recently announced Biden administration plan to aid competition in the meat industry, because they just devoted a lot of money towards helping this exact problem, which we will cover in a future episode when I talk about the Biden administration's plan to help competition in the meat industry. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I really hope it helps shed some light and provide context on the stories that this article covers. Sorry I don't have all the answers, but I do feel it's important that we at least make space for just knowing about the issues out there, sitting in that discomfort and then allowing that discomfort to drive what we do to make the world a slightly better place. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. And if you found this video helpful at all, please tap the like button and subscribe. I'll see y'all soon for another episode of Butchery 101. Bye!